It's so cold this month. How is climate change real? Climate change is good for Canadians and Russians because we can grow crops in the winter. Why do I care about climate change? I'm a comedian. I care more about how many people laugh at my jokes. How do you know climate change is not a natural process that the Earth does? Didn't we go through like 5 ice ages? My parents were climate deniers, but they gave birth to a climate activist, me. Scientists would call that a genetic mutation. I call it evolution. Hello fellow peacemakers, welcome to episode 21. Is climate change real? You might look at the title of this episode and go, huh? Billy, isn't solving climate change the whole point of your podcast? Why are you asking such an age-old question when the answer is clear? Well, because it's actually not clear to many people that climate change is real and will have devastating effects on our civilization. This month is so cold, so how do you know climate change is real? How do you know that climate change is not a natural process that the Earth does? Didn't we have like 5 ice ages? Climate change is good for Canadians and Russians because we can grow more crops in the winter, right? Why do I care about climate change? I'm a comedian. I care more about how many people laugh at my jokes. These are questions I get asked all the time by highly intelligent and educated people I've met in my life. And listener, if you're a climate skeptic and you're wondering the same, then this episode is perfect for you. Today, I'm going to address this for once and for all, whether or not climate change is real, and also, I'll show you that whether or not it's real, it's best that every one of us starts taking serious action now. Yes, that includes you, aspiring Bill Burr. First of all, what is climate change? What is global warming? What's the difference? So going back to the basics, I know, just bear with me for a second. According to NASA, climate change is a long-term change in the average weather patterns that have come to define the Earth's local, regional, and global climates. If that was too technical, let me break it down for you. Basically, climate change is the changes to the Earth's landscape and temperature over time. In comparison, global warming refers to the average rise in temperatures due to increased greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere due to human activity. Now, CO2 obviously being the most prominent greenhouse gas causing global warming. But there are a couple of other gases as well, like methane. But global warming does not explain changing weather patterns like droughts, monsoons, hurricanes, desertification, dying oceans, and things like that. You can think of it as global warming results in climate change. Now that we know what climate change is, before I answer whether or not climate change is real, why should you even care if climate change is real or not? Like, how does the planet changing affect your career as an aspiring actor, motivational coach, or a stay-at-home mom? First, understand that humans can only survive within a set of extremely precise conditions. Throughout your life, your body temperature fluctuates within less than 2 degrees Celsius. Your body pH has to stay within 7.35 to 7.45. Outside of this narrow range, you will die. And our body actually does this amazing thing called homeostasis that keeps us within these narrow ranges. If you walk out of the house and there's too much PM 2.5 in the air, you will die from respiratory disease. Too much lead in your water, you will die from lead poisoning. If the soil is too hot or acidic, then we can't grow crops and billions of us will die of famine. Understand that we have to stay within this perfect Goldilocks zone when it comes to air, water, temperature in order for us to survive. It's basically like walking on a tightrope, right? If you tilt slightly to the left or right, you will lose your balance, fall off, and die. Yes, that's how fragile we are as a species. Show me that you can live without air, food, and water, and I'll be convinced that climate change is less important than Bitcoin.
Bitcoin, please go to moon. Stop going sideways now.
Anyway, now that we know what climate change is, the first question I want to address is climate change real? And how do we prove that it's not just some imaginary problem that we've created in our head? Even my parents ask me all the time, well, this month is colder than usual, so how is climate change real? Mom and Dad, I really hope that you're watching this video because here's an analogy for you. Asking how is climate change real is like asking, how do you know that you're actually getting older? I want you to prove to me that you're aging because you don't look any visibly different from yesterday or even 3 months ago. Is aging imaginary? Is the Korean skincare industry a multi-billion-dollar scam?
피부 핏, 피부 타입, 피부 고민.
Okay, so here's where I need to explain the difference between weather and climate, the two things that people tend to get confused. Weather is what you see locally on a day-to-day basis. Like today is sunny, or it's raining, it's warm, it's cold, and the weather changes due to changes in air pressure in the water cycle, right? There's a lot of fluctuations going on. Climate requires you to zoom out onto a global scale and look at changes in weather patterns over time. Not just what's happening in Chicago today, but what's happening to the North and South Pole over the past 10 years, what's happening to the rainforest, are hurricanes becoming more and more frequent, etc., etc. And there's very telling, measurable scientific data, satellite images taken over the course of decades that reveal that our planet is changing drastically, right? Rivers have dried up, the ice caps are melting in both the North and South Pole, forests have been burned, oceans have been polluted, right? Coral reefs have been bleached, species have been lost, hurricanes are becoming stronger and more frequent, and the speed is only picking up. Also, climate change is not just about the planet getting hotter, but you will see more unpredictable extreme weather conditions that can take place that make it harder and harder for us as a species to adapt. So just because you don't notice any difference in your day-to-day life, because most of us are sheltered in big cities and spend way too much time browsing on social media, doesn't mean that the climate isn't changing. The second question is, if climate change is real, is climate change natural or man-made? The answer is a little bit complicated because it's actually both. This is where the deniers are not fully in the wrong, but they're wrong in their interpretation of the data. So the Earth does go through phases of warming and cooling, and it has gone through 5 ice ages in the past and periods including mass extinctions, and that's why dinosaurs are remnants of the past, right? I mentioned this in episode 4 of my podcast as well, but some 52 million years ago, Antarctica used to be a tropical paradise, very much like Florida. Right? Just imagine you building a Disneyland in Antarctica. Okay, so then you might go, well, Lily, if the Earth naturally warms on its own, then it's not human activity that's causing it, right? Plus, according to Donald Trump, a politician, not a scientist, by the way, the Earth is headed for another ice age, so the planet is going to cool itself. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. This is where the climate deniers have got it completely wrong. This time around, the climate change that we are experiencing is 1000% without a doubt caused by humans. You want some proof? Okay, so let me show you this graph of the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere in the past 800,000 years on Earth, measured in parts per million. Do you see this massive peak right here? Yeah, that's us in like the last 30 years when we decided to ramp up on fossil fuel production and animal agriculture. So that's cars, electricity, clothing, agriculture, phones, internet, data centers, everything contributing to greenhouse gases, right? And if you recall, greenhouse gases cause global warming and climate change. Before 1750, which is when the Industrial Revolution took place, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere remained roughly constant at 280 parts per million. Then, after 1750, it began growing exponentially. By 1980, we're at 340. By 2000, 370. By 2010, we're at 390. And finally, in 2020, we're at 417. And this number is only increasing. Ladies and gentlemen, we broke the Guinness record for CO2 concentration because 417 is the highest it's ever been for the past 800,000 years on Earth. And no, that is not something we should be proud of because 417 basically screams danger. And also, the Ice Age argument is a complete moot point because it's going to take us another tens and thousands of years to get to the next Ice Age. But long before that, we will kill ourselves with climate change in the next 100 years or so, and the science is clear if we don't take drastic action. Plus, studies have shown that increased CO2 concentration leads to decreased cognitive and executive functions. Yeah, that basically means you will make more stupid decisions in your life and you won't be as creative and funny and smart as you are now, purely because we've got more CO2 in the air and you won't be able to think clearly because it messes with your brain functions. How sad. What's even sadder is what's ahead of us. By 2050, the UN estimates that we will have up to 200 million climate refugees, and some other organizations estimate that it's going to be up to 1 billion. And these are people whose homes will be displaced by climate change and will be forced to migrate. Climate change can reduce crop yields by as much as 50%, which basically screams global famine. If you're like, oh, but what about Canada? Isn't warmer weather good for the wheat belt? Even if Canadian farmers can temporarily increase their output of a certain crop, we're still going to experience a global net loss in crop yields, which means export demands will sharply rise, and that's going to lead to global resource scarcity. Around the globe, especially in Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, billions of people will be dying of heat strokes and drought and floods, and by the end of the century, say goodbye to New York, London, Shanghai, Taiwan, because these cities will likely be underwater. And I haven't even talked about what's going to happen to the North and South Pole, the oceans, the coral reefs, the rainforest. But you can probably envision it all, right? All of this will happen if and only if we carry on with our lives doing nothing to combat climate change. Anyway, so I'm not here to blame my parents or the boomers for messing up the planet and leaving our generation and future generations in dire straits, because I think they were just trying to do their best to improve their quality of life and build a strong and robust society, albeit without understanding the consequences of the system that they have built. It's because of the generation before us that we now have access to all this great technology, the internet, agriculture, cars and airplanes, infrastructure that makes our lives more convenient. So I'm grateful for what they have built. But going forward, I think it's now the mission of our generation to redesign our flawed system with sustainability in mind to make it much better so that we can live in harmony with our ecosystem and other species on this planet who are affected by our actions. I'm an optimist though, so I don't think it's too late to turn the ship around, or else I wouldn't be making a whole video explaining to skeptics and deniers as to why climate change is real. Because I think by watching this video, some of the climate deniers will start to wake up to the severity of climate change and the science behind it, and instead of using their energy to resist that climate change is real, they will instead redirect their energy to solving the crisis, which is what I'm really hoping to get at with this video. But if you've listened to me and all my arguments so far and you're still not convinced that climate change is real, then this is the part where I pull out my ultimate weapon. I'm going to use Pascal's wager to show you why it doesn't matter if climate change is actually real or not. You should still act. Okay, so Pascal's wager. This is a famous philosophical dilemma that Pascal came up with when he was debating as to whether or not he should believe in the existence of God. So the original Pascal's wager goes like this. You have this chart with 4 quadrants, right? If God exists and you believe in it, then you will get eternal happiness in heaven. If God exists and you don't believe in it, then you will go to hell. If God does not exist, then nothing happens, whether or not you believe in it. So according to Pascal's wager, it's better if you believe in God because of the net gain here, right? Now, I'm not religious, but this is his proposal. But, okay, so now let's apply Pascal's wager to climate change for you philosophy nerds out there. So I was digging on the internet and I found a couple of my favorite ones on the climate wager. Here's the first one. Okay, is global warming real? Okay, look at the 4 quadrants. So if global warming is real and you believe in it, then tomorrow is a lot like today. If it's not real and you believe in it and you act, then tomorrow is a lot like today. And if it's real but you don't act, then possible end of Western civilization. And lastly, if it's not real and you don't act, tomorrow's a lot like today. Okay, so it seems like there's not a lot that we can lose, right, from acting. Tomorrow's a lot like today, but if you don't act, possible end of Western civilization if it's real. Okay, so the stakes are pretty high here. Okay, going to the second one. Okay, does climate change exist? So, if you believe in it and climate change exists, obviously you're going to get infinite payoff from solving the crisis. If you don't believe in climate change and climate change exists, then yeah, that's infinite loss right there. If climate change doesn't exist but you act on it, then at most it's going to be a mild inconvenience. But if climate change does not exist and you don't act on it, then you maintain the status quo. So, the key to note in this chart here is the infinite loss. Notice that similar to the previous one, if you act, at most you get a mild inconvenience, but at best you end up saving the civilization, so the payoff is infinite. And if you don't do anything about it, infinite loss, right? Okay, now let's take a look at another chart. So the third one is dangerous climate changes. Okay, so if it's not real and you don't act, then you just get lucky, right? Life continues as today. If it's real and you act, then thank goodness. By responding effectively, we have avoided a potential catastrophe and we have the benefits of resource efficiency. Life continues better than today. If it's real and you don't act, then we have blown it. By not responding to the threat, we have allowed a catastrophe. Life as we know, ends. Look at the red square. So if it's not real and we act on it, then that was good nevertheless, right? Because our response has allowed us to create a better environment and better quality of life, and then we no longer have to depend on fossil fuels. So life continues better than today. So I guess according to this chart, it's still a net gain if we act on it. And then if climate change is not real and we don't act, then although we did not respond to it effectively, there was no problem in the first place, life continues as today. So at most, by acting, life continues as today. Honestly, in my head, there's nothing wrong with that. If climate change is not real and we just make this unnecessary improvement to our life, I'm grateful for that. I'm totally cool with that. But if it turns out to be real and we don't act, then we're seriously screwed, right? Okay, so clearly we can see if climate change isn't real, at most we get a mild inconvenience. But at best, we get an improved quality of life, which honestly sounds pretty darn good. But if climate change is real and we don't act, we are headed for a hellscape. So ladies and gentlemen, even philosophy agrees that we should act on climate change now. Okay, fellow peacemakers, so I really hope that I've shown you that not only is climate change very, very real, it's human caused, it is 100% serious, so let's all take action to fight climate change by being more mindful of our own behavior and consumption. I understand that climate change is a systemic problem, and I will address that in future episodes, but in the meanwhile, that does not excuse you from not taking personal action. I've done many episodes in the past and will be doing many more episodes in the future on how you can join this movement and tackle climate change along with the rest of the world. And yes, you, aspiring comedian, you too can make a difference. Maybe one of the things you can do is to include climate change in one of your skits. Okay, so to close off this episode, I want to read a quote by Alanis Obomsawin. Did I butcher her name? Alanis Obomsawin. If I mispronounced it, I am super sorry. Alanis, okay, let me Google how to pronounce her name. Alanis Obomsawin, I think that's what it is. A Canadian Abenaki filmmaker and a First Nations activist. She said this: "When the last tree is cut, the last fish is caught, and the last river is polluted, when to breathe the air is sickening, you will realize, too late, that wealth is not in bank accounts and that you can't eat money."